The spark of learning, failing, rising. By 1960, Maria Alvarez had become a quiet force in her Queens neighborhood. People knew her as the bread lady, the woman with flour on her hands and kindness in her eyes. Her basement apartment always smelled of cinnamon, sugar, and hope. She woke before dawn every day. After her cleaning shift, she baked for hours, kneading dough until her arms ached. Some days, the bread came out perfect, golden and soft. Other days, it burned or collapsed, but she kept experimenting, scribbling notes in her little notebook. She wasn't just baking for money anymore, she was learning. Each loaf was a lesson, every mistake a teacher. One morning, her neighbor Mr. Patel stopped by with a request. "My daughter is getting married next week," he said. "Can you bake sweets for the celebration?" Maria hesitated, she had never catered an event before. But something inside her whispered, "Say yes." So she did. She spent the week preparing trays of pastries, staying up late shaping dough by candlelight. When she delivered them, the family's joy filled the room. People praised her cooking, asking for her name, her number. That night, Maria wrote in her notebook, "The spark comes when fear says no and courage says yes." The orders kept coming, small ones at first, then more. She used every penny to buy better ingredients, a second-hand oven, and a small hand-painted sign for her window, "Maria's Homemade Bakery, fresh bread daily." It wasn't a store yet, just her tiny apartment kitchen, but it felt like the beginning of something real. Then, one cold December night, tragedy struck. She returned from work to find smoke seeping from her building. The old wiring in the basement had caught fire. Firefighters managed to contain it, but her oven, ingredients, and supplies were destroyed. Maria stood in the snow, clutching her apron, watching the dream she'd built with bare hands turn to ash. For the first time since leaving Puerto Rico, she cried openly. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs. All the long nights, all the sacrifices, gone in minutes. Neighbors came to comfort her, offering blankets and tea. One elderly woman pressed a few dollars into her hand and said softly, "You'll bake again, Mija. The fire can't burn your spirit." Those words became a turning point. The next morning, Maria went back to work, cleaning offices by night, saving every cent. When she could, she baked small batches using borrowed kitchens from neighbors. Each loaf sold reminded her of what she still had, determination. A few months later, Samuel, the janitor friend who'd once taught her English, surprised her with a visit. He handed her a small envelope. "Some of the folks at work heard about what happened," he said. "We took up a collection." Inside was $183. Maria was speechless. She tried to refuse, but Samuel shook his head. "You gave us all hope, Maria. Let us give you something back." That money became the seed of her comeback. She rented a tiny corner space in a laundromat, no bigger than a closet, and set up a single oven. With a simple sign, "Fresh Bread by Maria," she began again. At first, few people came. But those who did always returned. They said her bread tasted like home, no matter where home was. She learned marketing without knowing the word. She smiled at every customer, remembered their names, offered samples to strangers passing by. Soon, word spread beyond the block. A local journalist stopped in one day, curious about the smell wafting down the street. He wrote a small piece for the community paper titled, "The Woman Who Bakes Hope." Maria clipped the article and framed it. By 1963, she had saved enough to move into a small storefront, just one glass window and a counter, but it was hers. She painted the name herself, Maria's Bakery. On opening day, she wore her best dress and stood behind the counter, trembling with joy. Friends, neighbors, and even Mrs. Miller, the woman who'd first hired her years ago, came to celebrate. When the first customer handed her a dollar bill for a loaf of bread, Maria paused for a moment, holding it gently before placing it in the cash box. That single dollar symbolized every sleepless night, every hardship, every moment she'd refused to quit. But with success came new challenges. Running a shop meant long hours, higher rent, and competition. Some weeks were good, others were a struggle. She often slept in the back room, wrapped in her apron for warmth. Still, every morning, she rose before dawn, whispering, "One loaf, one day at a time." Then, one afternoon, a man in a suit entered the bakery. "You're Maria Alvarez?" he asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. He smiled. "I own a cafe down the street. Your bread is the talk of the neighborhood. Would you supply us?" Maria blinked in disbelief. "You want my bread?" "I want the best," he said simply. It was her first wholesale order, a step into a world she had never imagined. That night, she sat in the quiet bakery, the smell of dough rising around her. She opened her old notebook, now worn and yellowed, and wrote, "Maybe success isn't one big victory. Maybe it's 1,000 small ones, every time you rise after falling." She looked around at the small shop that bore her name. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, but to her, it was a palace built on faith and flour. Outside, the neon lights of New York flickered in the distance. The city that had once terrified her now felt like an old friend, unpredictable, demanding, but full of possibilities. And Maria? She was no longer the girl with a suitcase. She was the woman with a spark.